So this week's political figure episode is on no one. It's the last couple days of my honeymoon, and I don't want to spend the typical 6 to 10 hours it takes me to research, write, record, and edit a political figure video. So I'm just gonna sort of ramble a little bit about my political experience that I've had over these past couple weeks in Canada. First, right now, it's BC's provincial elections are going on right now, and man, do they push voting, which is awesome. I also learned that their Liberal and Conservative Party merged into just the Conservative Party because, you know, we keep telling you Liberals are not on the left. And Canada certainly seems to have some nut jobs that are really aspiring to outdo American political nut jobs. And apparently they even got this dude running for prime minister named Pierre Poilievre, something French. He, like, rides a horse and shit. Never trust politicians who do campaigning on horseback. It's weird. None of them have ever turned out good. Anyway, he's apparently a certifiable lunatic, and according to some of the Canadians I've spoken to, he's Canada's Trump wannabe. Which, Canada, you've had like a front row seat to the original recipe. Why are you trying to emulate that? Don't do that. All of that said, it's been a very enlightening political experience being here in Canada. First, being in a country whose government, you know, kind of at least sort of works for them has been really refreshing. It's lovely here. They have some really cool, just like basic consumer protections, for example, like gas prices are pretty much set across the country, or at least the area that I'm in. Granted, it's expensive, but at least it's not exploiting people simply because of their location, and that's really nice. Plus, you don't really need a car here. The public transportation is pretty darn good. Even in little rural podunk towns way up in the mountains, they've got like buses and shuttles and shit. I was a little disappointed they didn't have more rail, mostly because I just wanted to ride a train through the mountains and I wasn't willing to pay like the $2,500 for their 3-day fancy train excursion through the mountains. But I digress. It's a lovely country, and it's just a bunch of like really small examples of little things that just are easy to implement and make everybody's life better. And it's like, why don't we do that back home in the States? Then the other thing I noticed is that I'm, you know, American, so I know nothing about any other country's politics at all. But the rest of the world seems to be really well versed on our politics, which was not surprising. But what was surprising is that there is a ton of people from all over the world here in Canada. Like, I'm pretty sure there's more Australians in Whistler than there is in Australia. I met real French people from France, not from French Canada. Met a bunch of lovely English people. Met people who are potentially the nicest people in the world from Pakistan. People from all over Asia and the Middle East. It's just been a really cool cultural melting pot experience that I really wasn't expecting in Canada. And all of them seem to know a lot about American politics. And aside from highlighting my embarrassing ignorance about the rest of the world, it's been incredibly refreshing. Because I've been able to go to bars and stuff here, like dive bars, and sit next to people who look like me. Then inevitably they ask what I do, and I'm like, I make content. They're like, oh, what about? And I'm like, you know, science and Minnesota and history and politics. Then they all kind of awkwardly dance around that a little bit because, you know, I look like me. They're making their assumptions as I make my assumptions about them, which is why I didn't necessarily want to talk about it, because if this was a dive bar back home sitting next to a dude in flannel, we have assumptions. But all of those assumptions have been wrong. These people are so refreshingly not insane. Like, I talked to a dude from England who's pretty conservative. Conservative to the point where he thought Margaret Thatcher was a good prime minister. And we had a great, productive conversation about that. Like an intellectual, political conversation where we had ideological differences and still talked about them in a very productive manner. It was so cool. I've forgotten that that's a real thing that humans can do. There was no nut job conspiracy theories. He didn't accuse me of eating babies because I thought unions were a good thing. That was like so cool. I asked this older conservative retired gentleman from England why he thought Margaret Thatcher was a good leader, and he's like, she busted the unions, and the unions were sending the jobs away because they wanted too much money. And I was like, oh, well, I'm never going to agree that union busting is a good thing, so let's get that out right away. But then I'm like, I've got a question. So after she busted the unions, did the jobs come back or stop going away? And he's like, well, no. And I was like, so then is it fair to assume that the unions weren't the problem and her busting them wasn't the solution? And he's like, you know what? That's a pretty good point. I hadn't thought about that. How fucking cool is that? But yeah, he was a Margaret Thatcher conservative, and it was like my favorite thing, because before he even knew where I stood politically, he leans over to me and he's like, Trump's a fucking twit, isn't he? Just like that. And then I busted out laughing. I'm like, yeah, he absolutely is. He's like, what the fuck is wrong with people in the United States? And I'm like, I wish I knew. And this has been the common theme across the board. It doesn't matter if they're conservative or progressive here in Canada. They all think that Trump's a fucking moron and his MAGA cult is weird. And now I've gotten to have that political conversation over beers with people from all over the world who have all kinds of differing political and social ideologies. And that was just the common thread. Trump and MAGA as a whole is the laughing stock of the entire world. Like, I knew this going into that, but I didn't realize how just open they are about that. Anyway, I found that really refreshing and also very, very depressing because, you feel vindicated, which is awesome. And you feel heard and seen by people from the outside. Like, yeah, I know, we're dealing with this. Believe me, we live it every day. It's horrifying. You're like, oh yeah, we do live that every day and it's depressing and literally the rest of the world is laughing nervously at us. But it's that kind of nervous chuckle because they realize that they're laughing at a man because he's, rambling about sharks and getting electrocuted in a boat in the water for no apparent reason. But then they also realize that that racist, Cheeto-stained, dementia-riddled Depends advertisement could also be president again. He was president. We've made that dumb decision before. And that would give him, nuclear codes and the ability to ruin the world economy, which he kind of did before and would happily do again. Anyway, I will leave you all with this. If you're a Trump supporter and you've ever, said, we need a leader that the world can respect, and they're not gonna respect Kamala Harris and they don't respect Biden, and you infer or you've said outright or you believe that anybody in the rest of the world respects Donald Trump, they don't. In fact, they very actively disrespect Donald Trump. And I really wish I could have recorded the way that the guy from England just came out and said, Trump's a fucking twit, isn't he? And I can't do the accent, and it just doesn't have the same effect, but it just so summed up what I imagined the rest of the world thought about him. And it has stuck with me this entire trip, even though I was hammered when he said it to me. That's how much of an impact it had. And I just hope that this story resonates with some of you in some small similar way to the way that his simple little sentence has resonated with me. Anyway, I love y'all. I love Canada. It's a beautiful country from everything I've seen so far. And as I keep saying over and over again, come November, please, for the love of God, make good choices. Because, I love a good joke as much as the next guy, but that joke shouldn't be our president.